If you're in research or medicine or you help make policy, you absolutely know this feeling. You're trying to find a clear answer, but you're just drowning in this massive, endless sea of studies and data. It really can feel like you're lost without a map. Well, today, we're talking about the map makers, the people who created and perfected an incredible tool for navigating this world, the Scoping Review.
So let's jump back to the early 2000s, because this quote right here, it just nails the problem. You had systematic reviews, literature reviews, narrative reviews. It was a total mess of confusing terms. And if all you wanted was to get a feel for what research was even out there on a big topic, there was no clear, trusted way to do it. It was a real roadblock.
So before we get to the solution, let's really dig into the challenge researchers were up against. They were basically stuck in a maze. They needed a way to see the whole big picture, not just get lost going down one single narrow path. They needed a map of the entire maze itself.
And this is the idea that started to bubble up, the scoping study. And you gotta notice the key word here, map. That's what makes it so different from, say, a systematic review. A systematic review is for a super deep dive to answer one tiny specific question, like, is this one drug better than that one? But a scoping study? No, its whole job is to chart the entire landscape of a research field, just to see what's out there, who studied it, and how they did it.
Okay, so having a cool concept is one thing, but having a process, a reliable, repeatable recipe, that's something else entirely. So that brings us to the very first real attempt to create a step-by-step guide that anyone could follow to actually do one of these scoping studies.
So, in 2005, Hilary Arksey and Lisa O'Malley published this totally game-changing framework. For the first time ever, there was a clear step-by-step guide. You'd start broad with your research question. Then you'd find and select the studies. You'd chart the data, which is really just a way of saying you pull out the key info from every study and organize it neatly. And then finally, you summarize everything. They also tacked on this interesting sixth stage, consultation, but they made it optional.
So what could you actually do with this new kind of map? Well, Arksey and O'Malley laid out 4 really key goals. First, you could finally get a sense of just how big a research field was. Second, you could figure out if it was even worth doing one of those super deep dive systematic reviews. Third, you could package up the findings for policymakers. And maybe the most important one, you could spot the gaps, the empty spaces on the map where nobody was doing any research at all.
So what happens when you give a bunch of really smart people a brand new map? Well, they start using it, of course. And right away, they start finding ways to make it better, more accurate, and way more detailed. And that is exactly what happened next.
What's so cool here is you can literally see the method getting better in real time. Just 5 years later, a team led by Danielle Levac took a hard look at some of the kind of gray areas in that original framework. The study selection process was a little unclear, so they said, hey, let's use a team approach with at least 2 reviewers to keep it consistent. Data charting was a bit vague, so they said the whole team should build the form together. They even broke that final summarize stage into 3 separate steps. But the biggest change they made was all about that optional 6th stage.
Yeah, this slide right here really gets to the heart of a huge philosophical shift. For Arksey and O'Malley, talking to stakeholders was, a nice little bonus, some added value. But Levac and her team, they argued it was absolutely essential for making the review rigorous. They saw it as a mandatory step to make sure the map you were creating was actually useful to the people who needed it, the patients, the clinicians, the policymakers.
And this push for more rigor, it didn't stop there. The next big evolution was all about taking this now improved method and turning it into a real, globally recognized standard. The goal was to make sure that a scoping review done in one country could be trusted and understood by researchers anywhere else in the world.
This timeline just lays out the journey so perfectly. You can see the whole story unfold. Starts with that foundational framework in 2005. Then you get those huge enhancements in 2010. Then comes 2018. And this is a big one, the release of the PRISMA SCAR, which is basically a checklist to make sure everyone reports their findings the same way. Think of it like creating a universal legend for all the maps. And by 2020, big players like JBI were publishing these incredibly detailed manuals, really cementing the scoping review as a mature, serious methodology.
So why was all this standardization so important? Well, just look at this number. As late as 2016, only 13% of published scoping reviews said they used a pre-planned protocol. A protocol is just the plan you make before you start. Can you imagine the potential for bias when almost 90% of researchers were basically drawing the map as they went along?
A protocol is basically the roadmap for the map makers. When you publish your plan ahead of time, the whole thing becomes transparent. It stops you from accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, changing your rules halfway through to get the result you want. And it's huge for preventing 5 different research teams from doing the exact same work, which, let me tell you, cuts down on so much wasted time and money.
And all of this leads to a subtle, but actually really important change. The field slowly shifted from calling it a scoping study to a scoping review. Now, why does that little word matter so much? Well, because the word review carries weight. It comes with this strong expectation that the process will be systematic, rigorous, and totally transparent. It was a signal that this isn't just a casual look around anymore, it's a formal, reliable way of synthesizing evidence.
Okay, so after this whole journey of evolution, from just a vague idea to a standardized, rigorous method, what's the big payoff? Why does having this powerful map-making tool matter so much in the world today?
So, what's the bottom line? A modern scoping review gives us a trustworthy, big-picture look at really complex or brand-new topics. Think about fast-moving fields like AI and medicine. It shows us the key ideas, the main theories, and most importantly, it shines a giant spotlight on what we don't know, on those critical gaps in our knowledge. That is just priceless for policymakers who need that bird's-eye view. And it lays a solid foundation for all future research, making sure we're building on what's been done, not just starting over all the time.
Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. In a world where we have an absolute explosion of information, with new studies coming out every single day, what's ultimately more valuable? A perfect, detailed understanding of one single tree, or a reliable, up-to-date map of the entire forest? The rise of the scoping review seems to suggest the map might just be winning.